Welcome, everyone. I know people are kind of rolling into the room now. We're going to wait like 30 seconds or so for everyone to enter the room, and then we'll get started. I hope everyone's enjoying the conference so far. All right. Hopefully, okay. So hopefully everyone's entered the room. This session is dedicated and directed towards driving inclusive team idea generation. Hopefully you can see my slide deck. We're going to continue to explore some of what's been discussed earlier in the sessions today. And Charu mentioned in the previous session, the 635 method, which I'll talk about. But I'm very pleased to be joined with by Michelle Martinez and Saadia Saifuddin, who I will intro briefly. But I wanted to start out by showing this slide and ask you kind of without anyone really answering this except to themselves, does this ever happen at your companies? And so here we've got a great picture of a diverse room and everyone raising their hands. And you can imagine that this is a patent brainstorming session or an idea gathering session. In my experience, this has never happened. I wish it did, but the goal is to try to get towards this. And so today's session, we'll talk about how we get more people involved in the patenting process, and particularly in the idea generation and submission process. So as I mentioned, I'm joined by Michelle Martinez, who I will give a moment to introduce herself. I wanted to call her my auspicious colleague, but she's not, but I'm joined by the auspicious Michelle Martinez, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Ahsan. That is quite the intro. I'm Michelle. I'm currently the Senior Patent and Open Source Counsel at eBay. I've been a patent attorney for going on, oh my gosh, 14 or so years now. Mostly been working at a law firm. I have a computer science degree from Northwestern, so I also had a very brief opportunity to be an engineer at GE Plastics, which was a great opportunity. But I'm really very, very involved in and excited about diversity. You know, as a diverse, I'm from Utah, and so I've really experienced a lot of kind of the effects and benefits of diversity. And I'm excited to share with you what we're doing at eBay.
Thank you, Michelle. We are also joined by Saadia Saifuddin.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this session, and thanks to all the conference organizers. Really appreciate the opportunity. My name's Saadia. I've been at Cisco for 2 years now. I've worked at various different companies, GE, BlackBerry, in licensing as well. And I'm currently a co-lead of a Cisco employee network group. It originally started called WIN, short for Women's Inventor Network. And then the mandate is essentially to increase female representation in the inventorship process. And we've recently expanded the mandate to go beyond just focusing on gender, and it's a program that's open to everybody. And we've made some really good progress with a very strong steering committee working on the initiative, and I'm looking forward to telling you more about it.
Thank you, Saadia. And just briefly about myself, I am on the patent team at McDermott, and Emery. More importantly, I had the privilege to contribute to the IPO Diversity and Innovation Toolkit, which is an incredible toolkit, and it's listed in the many resources that this conference has. It's a link, but you can also web search IPO Diversity and Innovation Toolkit, and it'll probably be the first hit. I have had the privilege to also implement a lot of diversity and innovation techniques at a number of companies, including Facebook and elsewhere. And I'm really happy to share my experiences on that and freely answer any questions anyone may have during this session, but also afterwards, if you want to reach out to me. I'm happy to share with some of the techniques that work with the companies I've worked with. Now, as Bo mentioned in the chat, please feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat. We are trying to reserve 7 minutes at the end for a Q&A. We may end up burning into that time, but we absolutely welcome any questions during this presentation via the chat. And so with that, I'll start with the panel discussion. I'm going to stop my screen share so we can see the panelists a little bit more prominently, and start with asking you, Michelle, could you tell me a little bit about what eBay is currently doing for its IP education in general and for its diverse inventors in particular?
Yeah, So I'm sure everybody knows, eBay is a huge company. We have over 185 million buyers and we have 19 million sellers. I think we have between contractors and employees, something like 20 plus thousand employees. So, I mean, obviously we have a real good opportunity here to address the needs of both our internal employees and also our customers. We just released our diversity survey and we found out that we have 40% self-identified women, 60% men, let's see, 43 Asian, 45% white, 8% Hispanic, 3% Black, and 3% other. So, eBay is doing a really good job of kind of building up the diversity internally. And what we're really working on in the patent team, the open source team, kind of the IP team in general, is a macro view of education on diversity and inclusion, and then a micro view on brainstorming. So on the macro view, eBay has over 60 global, what we call communities of inclusion. Those are, women's groups, pride groups, Asian American, really anything you can think of. And the goal there is the more that we can educate our community on the differences in diversity that we have, the way that trickles down. So a lot of times what happens with innovation is people don't feel like they have a comfortable platform to share their ideas, or that their ideas aren't going to be heard, or that they're not going to be understood. And so in the macro view, we have this opportunity to really share these diversity things with everyone in our community, so that we give everyone a really safe and comfortable platform to pull those ideas. So that is kind of the macro view of how we're doing it. On a micro view for the patent team, we are doing really, really narrow sort of brainstorming sessions. So for example, we're going to have a women's only session because studies have found that women collaborate in a very different way when it's just women, or when they have similarly situated colleagues with them in a collaboration, than they do if they have, for example, a male manager or a lot of men in the room where they feel like perhaps they don't have the same opportunity to speak up. So we are in the process right now of having women recommend other women that they work with to have a brainstorming session, so that we can really work on pulling those ideas out in what it feels like a comfortable and safe collaborative space.
Thank you, Michelle. On that point of how women, as a broad generalization, collaborate or possibly innovate differently, it's an area I've been searching for. So I leave this as an open question. Anyone, if they'd like to share in the chat, because I know we have academics and others here. All of us individually probably innovate differently than others. But if anyone has thoughts on how certain groups, as a broad generalization, innovate in a different way or at a different time of day, please share that in the chat, because it's an area I've been trying to find content material on, but I can't. And I think that's incredibly important to the challenge that we are all facing as a collective. So I appreciate you mentioning that, Michelle. Saadia, same question for you. Could you speak a little bit about how Cisco what they're doing for IP education in general and diverse inventors in particular?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. And thanks, Michelle, for your insight about eBay. It's very interesting. For us, so Cisco, we did sign on to the Diversity Pledge, and we have support from the highest levels of the company. We're really appreciative of the structured approach that the pledge presented, and we have committed to track and increase our efforts in all of those 6 areas. At a company level, Cisco has a really strong commitment to social justice initiatives, and increasing diversity in inventorship is a component of that. For IP development specifically, what we really feel is a big differentiator between our initiative and others, maybe that we also have really sincere engineering champions and supporters within the company. So just to further elaborate on that, it goes beyond just like top level engineering support, which we also have, but really the senior tech talent have driven a lot of the diversity programs that we're going to be speaking about. So having engineering-led and sponsored initiatives allows for scaling and a reach that just the patent team may not be able to achieve. So I really recommend that as something that people should consider implementing as well. So for our diverse mentorship program, it's been driven basically based on the commitment by the engineering teams, as well as a company-wide level of commitment. And we feel like this is really what's making it very successful.
That's good to hear, Saadia. I'm excited to hear more because the dedication at Cisco for this effort, to hear a little bit more in detail about what those efforts are. Michelle, I know that you received a direct question about diversity that you thought might be relevant to the audience, so please.
Yeah, so the question was, I talked about the way that eBay's diversity is broken down as a whole, and we do drill down a little bit more than I was really going to share on this call, but the question was, how is the diversity in perhaps patent filings or invention disclosures? And my team is actually currently working on that. So I believe that in 2019, the USPTO shared that only 12% of inventors were women. And the way that I believe that they do that now is a name search. So I can't say that that's particularly accurate. I know a lot of times I'm a little unclear on whether or not it's a female or a male. But at eBay, we do have a lot of data that is self-provided on the types of, it's really man or woman. It's not so much broken down into race. The other thing that we're looking at is socioeconomic diversity, which I think gets overlooked a lot. And what we are trying to do to combat that right now is we are trying to do recognitions and highlights. So for example, we can look at the invention disclosures or the filings or the issuance, depending on how we want to do it. And for each month, perhaps let's say it's Women's Month, we're going to highlight a woman inventor on our internal page so that there is more recognition about that. And hopefully that will help drive more diversity there and will help kind of give us a better idea of those kinds of statistics. And so we'll be able to really use those statistics and focus in on what we need to do.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Kind of on that point, and could you speak a little bit about what you've seen in that process as to what are some of the barriers that are preventing underrepresented audiences from engaging in the patenting process at eBay? And maybe not just at eBay, but broadly, whatever your experience.
Yeah, so I think it's, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase it. I think what it is it's kind of the people that are already involved have a really good handle on the way that it's done, and they're kind of very confident in what's going on. So they're more likely to file more applications. They're more likely to be more assertive in having disclosures or feeling like their ideas are valuable. They've already been through the process. We are really looking for innovation to come not just from the developers, but really anybody. I mean, we obviously have marketing teams, HR, eBay is such a big company, and those kind of innovative ideas come from anyone. It's really hard. Anyone that's in the patenting process or really the open source process knows it's really complicated and it's a very long-term situation. And if you aren't familiar with it, I think you just feel very overwhelmed and you don't know what to do. And so part of the way that we're trying to combat that is by having like patent 101s for each team. So reaching out to each VP and their team and saying, here are kind of the steps. You can always reach out to the legal team. Here's our distribution list. Here's how you can do that. We're happy to talk with you individually through that. And this applies to everyone, not just kind of your typical, what we think of as inventors. The other thing that we're doing is we have, I think we've just renamed it, but it's basically like an invent week where basically everybody in the company is able to submit ideas that they think will benefit the company. And then the patent and open source team, we're going through those to see whether or not we feel like those would be good just for business, or if they would be great for patents and open source. And then we can reach out to them individually without them feeling like the onus is on them to come to us.
Got it. Now, we have some questions from the audience, and I wanted to see if either of you wanted to field those. So the first one relates to working with diversity from the lens of people with disabilities. And this goes to both of you, Michelle and Saadia. Any thoughts? Like, have you had any thoughts on this, or have you had any experience with this?
So I'll take that. So our focus initially was on gender, and we've now expanded it to also track and try to improve racial contributions. And in terms of disabilities, I believe that is one of our networks and our focus group. We haven't yet combined it with mining for inventorship data among that community. So I think this is one of the challenges that were mentioned in a different panel, but it's just about data and then what the self-disclosure statistics are.
Thank you, Saadia.
Yeah, similarly at eBay, I mean, it is on our radar. I think that we are sort of taking it one step at a time, but we do have those communities of inclusion. And those really do kind of help us focus on groups that maybe feel like they're not having as much opportunity to contribute. And so hopefully we will have a really robust program for everybody.
I'm going to give Michelle and Saadia a minute to read Mike's question because it's a heavier one, and then I'll respond to the disabilities, the question about engaging individuals who are differently abled. What I've found to be beneficial in this in this spot is reducing friction overall for the idea submission process. Now, importantly, and I know Jeremiah, I think Chan at Facebook mentioned this 2 days ago, there's the idea of making the process easier for everyone. Doesn't necessarily, it doesn't focus or better facilitate the engagement. It's not necessarily more inclusive, and forgive me, Jeremiah, if I'm mischaracterizing it, but it's not necessarily more inclusive of the underrepresented audiences. But when it comes to differently abled individuals, reducing the friction for idea submission. Sandra Novak had the idea, I think 2 days ago, about letting individuals submit invention disclosures by audio recording or a video recording from their phone. I know a lot of companies still use the very ancient process of a Microsoft Word document that you download, open, edit, save, print, sign, scan, send back, which is a throwback from the 90s. But that is difficult for many people, and I can imagine how for individuals who might be differently abled, that might be a challenge as well. So the idea, so an approach that reduces the friction overall for everyone would hopefully better engage everyone as well. And so with that, I'll go back to Michelle and Saadia on Mike's question regarding the cultural background of mid-level managers and whether that helps or hinders the process. And so let me, Michelle, please.
Okay, I think the answer is both. So I mentioned I'm here in Utah. I've actually lived all over the country and outside of the country, and I've come home to Utah. And I am frequently one of the only female and people of color patent attorneys in kind of the experiences I've had at law firms. And I'll tell you just a very quick story. Like I said, I have a computer science background. I was meeting with some inventors to take an invention disclosure. And when I called them, one of them said, is there somebody at your firm that has a computer background that will be able to understand what we're talking about? A man in your firm. And I said, well, that would be me. I have a computer science degree, so hopefully we'll be okay. But the takeaway from that is I had a manager at the time that was kind of a champion, like came in and said, no, we had her do it on purpose. She can understand it. And so in that case, those mid-level managers are your champions. And in eBay, we do try to do that. We have kind of an open source champion or sometimes a patent champion or somebody that really does support you and pushes you forward. And I think that is the way that things are going. I think that culture and experience are moving towards really having someone champion for you. That being said, I think we are still in a place where there is a very kind of rigid idea of who contributes and whose contributions are valuable, and that there can be some difficulty pushing through that. I haven't actually seen that at eBay yet, so I can't speak to that for the companies specifically, but I know as a whole that can be a problem. And the way to do it, I think, again, is education. I mean, I really think that education and really having people learn about individuals in their group, in their direct reports, is how we break through some of those difficulties.
I appreciate that, Michelle. I remember a comment from a session a day or so ago where someone said, it is very rare to encounter someone who is truly and actively trying to stop people from engaging the process. Usually it's an idea of people just don't realize that they might be hindering it. Saadia, do you any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I was going to say it's a really good question, because I think in a lot of diverse focus groups, like I've been on a lot of women in IP or women in finance or different types of panels, there tends to be a tendency that it's focused on the group you're addressing. But I'd have to say, like at Cisco, there is that, like if you identify with a particular group, you may be more supportive of the cause. But actually, I would say that some of our biggest proponents are not in the diverse categories, but they're very supportive of the effort. And so they will actually lobby on behalf of that, even if they don't directly identify it with it. So I think it's more like aligning the incentive of increasing diversity, increasing innovation value to the company is really what helps people get on board, and not so much their specific background. At least that's been our experience.
Thank you, Saadia. And so now I'd like to learn more, as I'm sure our audience would, about the program at Cisco, Saadia. So if you don't mind sharing your screen. And during that time, Michelle, I know there was a question directed to you in the chat. If you want to take this opportunity to maybe answer that question in the chat. And then if there was one to me, I'll answer it as well. I know we're in the 2020, 2021 world, and this is the new way we do conferences. So this way we can answer people's questions, and then Saadia can present. We're going to do this all at once.
Yeah, so really quickly, we do track who attends Invent Week. I mean, COVID has actually made it in a way easier because it's all virtual. Before it was just at the eBay campus, but it was still really easy to track that. Honestly, the way that we attract participation for everything is incentives and recognition, because really what we have found, and what I have even personally found, is that when you're recognized for your contributions and people can give you a pat on the back or a gold star, feel really good about yourself. And so, like I said, we try to highlight people, not just during months like, you know, Pride Month or Women or Asian American Month, but also just for all of their contributions. We do badges on their profile pages on our internal internet. They get awards, so they get swag, they get money, days off, and everything like that. And the more people we can reach with those incentives and that recognition, the more excited they are to contribute to their community and to the company, and they see their contributions that make eBay a better place. And that's kind of the, I'll call it the easy way to do it, because everybody really loves to be recognized for their contributions.
Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, so I'm going to start the program overview. Okay,
Thank you,
thanks. Okay, thanks. I just wasn't sure. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just give you an overview of our specific structure that we've implemented. And the goal here is that I hope it helps trigger some ideas that other companies can also implement. I did see a note about a smaller scale. This turned out to be quite a large program, but I'm quite confident you could implement this on a smaller scale as well. And then I just want to give an overview of the objectives and then how we've gone about executing. So basically on the left, we have the 4 objectives we're trying to address. Basically, we're trying to connect people together. So we are working with groups of 4. I think, like Ahsan's going to talk about later, this tends to be an ideal group size for brainstorming. So we have 4 mentees. We're pairing those mentees, pretty eager employees, with experienced mentors. And we send out a survey. We ask people what their preferences are. And then based on the survey responses, we form teams and we try to optimize it so they're in similar time zones and they can work together. Then the second objective is to grow. There's a lot of people at our company, I'm sure at yours as well, that are very eager to learn about new areas. And then in this process, they could learn about coming up with ideas, what's a patentable invention. There's been a lot of comments about people just not knowing how to go about filing a patent, especially if it's for the first time. The other objective is to collaborate and innovate together. We found there have been challenges now, especially with a remote environment, but just in general, how to work with other people. Like it might be very difficult for somebody to innovate individually, but now once they're with a group of people, they can brainstorm. It's a safe space. They can throw out ideas and then hopefully come to a very valuable solution. And then the inclusion part of it is really to come to address the main goal I think that we're all trying to improve is diversifying patentable ideas from all parts of the talent pool. So these are the objectives. In terms of the structure, like I mentioned, we sent out a survey. We have a guide. We don't enforce it rigorously, but just the fact that it's a guideline really encourages people to adhere to it. And that is that we'd like at least half of those teams to comprise a woman. So at least 2 out of the 4 would be female representation. Then the mentees themselves would form connections with each other. They form connections with the mentor. The mentors are very eager to help and guide them. And then we realized that it's really hard to come up with patentable ideas. And so we've given them a time frame of 12 weeks. We've suggested a minimum commitment, which is not small, but it's also reasonable. And with all of the people working towards the goal, they will research new ideas. They'll learn, they'll grow, they'll brainstorm, ideate, and then the goal is really to come up with an idea. And so once they've iterated on it, gone back with the mentor, then it's a process of documenting. And this also is a pretty challenging process. So going through submitting an invention disclosure form, figuring out what is known prior art, what is developed in the solution and then explaining that in a coherent way is also part of the process. And then we give them an opportunity to celebrate what they've done, and that's in a showcase. And this is a presentation that we invite a lot of people to attend, and we've had pretty good turnouts. That it comprises the technology talent pool, the IP communities, the patent committees, where people can share ideas. We have a team space chat where people are discussing the idea, and it's been really good. And so we've had 2 completed cohorts. We're currently in our 3rd. And then what I'm just presenting here is basically what we say are wins, which is kind of a play on the name, which is the Women's Inventor Network. On the left is just the business unit breakdown. It's across the company. In the middle are the years in the industry. Primarily, they're people who are new to the workforce, but this isn't exclusive. There's definitely people that have had significant experience, but they just haven't had patent experience. So that's what we're addressing here. And then disclosure submissions, many of them have tried once, maybe not been very successful. So it's either 0 or 1 is the predominant, but there are people that have had tried a few times. And then in terms of our first 2 cohorts, we've had over 60 teams. So there are teams of 4 people, over 80 disclosures. Some teams have submitted more than 1, over 100 people for the first time. And then the approval rates are comparable to regular submission process. And we really adhere to the same criteria. We don't make it easier for these submissions to go through because we really want people to learn the process. And then currently in our 3rd cohort, we have over 250 participants. So the scale of the program is really big, like it's over several hundred people have gone through it already, but we feel like it's been really effective. And we put a lot of resources, but this is how we feel like we'll really get value add from the program as well as value to the company. And pretty proud of this program. If anyone has other questions, I'm happy to talk more about it. But I think over time, this will really make an impact in changing the trajectory and some of the numbers that we've seen, not just from our own companies, but across the industry and the US PTO studies. Hopefully with the updates, we'll see those numbers increase.
So Saadia, there's a question for you. How do you select the ideation ideas?
Yeah, so the ideas, so there are a number of ways. It's a really good question, and we're also trying to optimize how that's done. And I think that's referring to the actual problem statement. So this is one of the objectives we've tasked the mentors with. So they will either come up with a real business problem, or they'll open it up and help the mentees guide towards a problem they would like to solve. But we want it to be reasonable, challenging, but the goal is to come up with a disclosure within the time. And there have been people who have written code, they've tested in the labs, like it is a significant amount of work. It's really not light ideas, but they're ones that with the mentor's guidance and having gone through the process and have significant patents themselves, they're able to provide prompts. But the mentees aren't restricted to that. We really want people to come in with their own experience, their own preferences, basically narrow down to a focus area within a couple of weeks, and then spend the bulk of the time actually executing and working towards a solution. But it's a really good question.
Thank you, Saadia. One more question, if you could answer briefly, and they're 2 related questions. How do you select, and then how do you match mentors to mentees?
Yeah, another really good question. So then the mentors, it's either, I don't think there's as rigorous of a survey, but we do outreach to mentors, and a lot of people have signed up. We basically have a form that you could just set up and just distribute it as a sign up form, and ask mentors to sign up. What are their preferred areas of mentoring where they feel they have capable expertise? And a lot of people have signed up, volunteered on their own. And we really, I just have to say, we really try to make it minimal from the mentor perspective, because we want to respect their time, but we also realize that new inventors really can't do it on their own, and they really need guidance. And so we're trying to balance where it's a reasonable expectation from the mentors, but also the bulk of the work is focused on the mentees to actually come up with problems. And so as guidance, we request like weekly check-ins, and if the mentors have more time to contribute and get involved, many of them do, but we try to not make it the mentors dominating the invention. It's really meant to help the brainstorming for the mentees to raise their level of innovation.
Got it. I'm really energized, by the way, by all the questions we're receiving. So I'm going to play it by ear here. I know I tried to reserve 7 minutes at the end for questions, but because we have such an engaged audience, I'm going to kind of integrate that 7 minutes now. And so please, everyone, keep your questions coming. Saadia, there was another question for you. I believe it related to how you select the prompts, but how does that align with your innovation strategic priorities? And I believed it was your selection of the ideas or ideation.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a good question. So I'll just give a little more granularity. Basically, we ask for people to choose up to 3 focus areas, and those focus areas are aligned with the company's strategic focus areas. And so, I mean, generally it would be hardware, security, cloud, other areas. I'm sure Facebook would have like augmented reality or different things that you want innovation to be developed in generally, but not too restrictive that it becomes very difficult. And then people will select, they'll rank 1, 2, and 3. And so part of the challenge with balancing people's time zone preferences and area preferences, they may not get their first choice, but as long as they get one of the top 3, they're generally pretty happy. And we do have a free forum place where people can put their comments and what they'd like to contribute. And we've seen so much enthusiasm. A lot of people just say, we just want the opportunity to learn something new. And they will choose areas outside of their focus areas. So in terms of growth, if someone wants to change into maybe a new engineering group, this will help them learn. And then they now have more experience to consider if they wanted to work in a different area. So it's really opened up a lot of opportunities. But to respond to that question, we listed
that insight.
Sure.
Now I'm going to talk a little bit about another approach to ideation, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. So give me a moment. Okay, so first of all, I want to acknowledge someone. His name's David Aramian. He's a real thought leader. He's IP counsel at BlackRock right now. He told me about something about this process called ideation and the industry and kind of thought leadership around it. And I'd never heard of it before. So I'm going to ask everyone to kind of fasten their seatbelts now, because I'm going to throw a lot of content out at you, and hopefully some minds will be blown on this approach, because I had never heard of this approach before. But I'm going to level set and provide some definitions really quickly. So everyone's kind of heard of brainstorming. Maybe we don't know what the definition is. Ideation is the process of generating ideas on the spot. Traditionally, patent counsel, including outside counsel, come into a room and ask people to share ideas they already have. That is different than ideation, which is coming up with an idea on the spot. Now, this was a big surprise to me, but patent counsel are not the only people who need to get ideas and have a whole like career based around the collection of ideas and evaluating them. Pixar, other companies, ideation is how you create stories for the next Pixar movie. It's about how you create stories for a video game. It's how you solve problems, how you release a new product for a company. There is an entire set of literature on ideation, and I'm going to talk, and that's what I'm going to dive into and share from as what I think might be an optimized approach for engaging underrepresented audiences. So broadly speaking, there's 3 types of idea generation or ideation. There is independent idea generation. That's where you think of an idea yourself. There is collaborative idea generation. That's where you get several people together and they come up with an idea together. And then there is hybrid idea generation, which, spoiler alert, is what I'm going to say is an effective approach for engaging underrepresented audiences. So we're all kind of familiar with the standard team approach. You get a bunch of people into a room. Usually it's a product team or an engineering team, and you ask them what they're working on. Now, I'm sure none of you are surprised by this. Oftentimes you get a really excited person, usually they're a male, and they'll just be really excited about what they're talking about, and they will steal the show. Like they'll take up most of the time. And there's a lot of issues with that. Now, there's a lot of pros and positive things to this approach, and I'll share my slides afterwards, but there are a lot of negatives as well. There's the loudest person in the room problem. There is the problem of this approach doesn't require everyone in the room to engage. if one person shares an idea, other people may piggyback on that idea. It often requires advanced preparation. And as I'm sure many of the in-house counsel here know, a lot of the engineers and innovators don't have time to prepare for these meetings in advance. So they come into a room, you ask them what they're working on, they're like, oh, I wish I would have prepared, or I should have brought a list. Now, this approach to idea generation, when you call people in a room, as opposed to just collecting ideas from them, has a lot of similar problems if you call a group into a room and you ask them to come up with an idea on the spot. So I'd like to ask you kind of rhetorically, where has this led us? Are you engaging all your innovators, and are you identifying all your IP? Obviously, no. There's a lot of problems with this. It's going to take a long time to get to parity, both for gender parity, but also as we can run the numbers better, racial and better engagement of racial and ethnically diverse audiences, LGBTQ+ audiences, differently abled. However we can get to that data, I think we're a long time out unless we change something. So that spoiler alert, here we are at the end of the kind of like the crux of the movie here. It's hybrid idea generation. So well, I guess I'll put the slide up. Hybrid idea generation is this idea of, it combines both individual idea generation, so people writing down and solving problems themselves, but then getting the group to then also solve that same problem together. And I'm going to describe how that happens. But just to kind of sell it to you there's a very famous study by Karen Giratra called Idea Generation, the Quality of the Best Idea. It's in the conference resources. And you can Google it as well, or you can email me and I'll share it with you, a freely shareable copy with you. But this approach results in more ideas, 3 times more, better ideas because they have better quality, and there's better discernment of the quality of the idea. And it's for various different reasons. When you force people to participate in the process, their creative juices start flowing, and then they start to be better able to contribute to an idea and discern how well and comment on others' ideas. There's no free writing effect. So if you have a manager in the room, the people who are subordinate to the manager may not want to criticize that idea, or may free write on it and improve on that idea as opposed to exploring an idea they had on their own. And various other benefits to this process as well. So the one approach to hybrid idea generation is called the 6-3-5 method. And that method is, you take 6 innovators. You give them 5 minutes to write down 3 ideas to a problem that you prompt them with. So I'm not going to get into now how you select that problem. We've kind of talked about it. But let's say you challenge the group with a problem to solve. First of all, you ensure that everyone in the room is capable of solving that problem. So it could, and then you give them 5 minutes to write down 3 ideas to it. And so ideally, this is done in person, and it's usually a 90-minute session. For the first 15 minutes, you contextualize the problem. You explain what the problem is. You let the group of 6 individuals ask about the problem. And thereafter, you then have your first round of 5 minutes, and each of the individuals will write down up to 3 solutions to address that idea. You then, in the next round, each individual jumps seats like musical chairs, and then they look at the names. They look at the ideas that were written by the person previously in that seat. So they spend the first minute doing that. And then they write down 3 new solutions to that idea, either improvements to the ideas they've already read, or new ideas that are seeded by what they've read. And you repeat this 5 additional times for a total of 6 rounds, and you end up getting up to 108 ideas. You can do this from anywhere from 4 to 7 people, and eventually you'll have up to 108 ideas. And that's how you do it in person. You can do it remotely using Google Sheets, and I believe I have a screen here, but instead of jumping seats, you jump sheets, and you have like a round 1, round 2, round 3, and then you can have each individual write down their idea, their solution to the prompt in the column. And so in what we've learned in our implementing this at Facebook and elsewhere is we now hide the names of individuals. So while I'm able to reverse engineer and figure out who wrote down what idea, the individuals, as they write down their ideas, their names are not there. So it welcomes more participation. And there's a lot of benefits to this approach. There is less fear of a person's idea being judged. There's kind of forced engagement with the idea, and so on. So I know that's a lot of content there. I'll share this last slide. So this, as I mentioned, 65 is one of many different approaches out there. There's a whole world in academic literature to idea generation. You can select the type of approach you want based on the problem you're trying to solve. And very importantly, the prompt you give your team will define the solutions you have. So if you give them a prompt that is likely not subject matter eligible, the solutions are not going to be subject matter eligible, don't expect solutions to be subject matter eligible. But if you prompt with a particularly technical prompt, then you are likely to have that, and so on. So the prompt you choose is really going to define the types of solutions you have. And I believe there's a question, Michelle, that you wanted to jump in with.
I do. I have a question about, and Saadia, being curious what you think as well. I am definitely an in-person person. I like seeing people. And so COVID and being home on Zoom has been a little bit tricky for me. I'm anxious to actually be back in the office. I know I'm the one person out of a billion, but I see a lot of kind of benefits and drawbacks to what you just said, in-person rotating seats versus rotating sheets. And my question to you both is, do you feel like these kinds of brainstorming sessions that are done virtually actually help in the areas where we're talking about underrepresented inventors, where they don't really feel like they have a seat at the table, but maybe this virtual world actually helps maybe give everyone a level playing field, so to say? Or do you think that being virtual makes it harder?
It's both. I think it's both. So one of the things we've noticed with some of the clients we work with is that working moms have much less time now because they have a triple shift. They're not only often taking care of the children and their job, but they're often educating their children as well. So there's less time there. So there's less of a seat at the table for being virtual. But it's up to the in-house counsel to identify the audience they're targeting and making sure that they're engaged and invited to these sessions. What this is a tool to engage the people who show up. How you identify and get them to show up here is really important. And that's the work that, like at Facebook, I'm working with Kevin Ahlstrom. He's going out, socializing the problem, posting to the appropriate women in tech groups and other various underrepresented tech groups to get them engaged in showing up to these sessions. And then all of a sudden, like, boom, we get 108 ideas from an underrepresented audience. And that's a really easy, big win all of a sudden.
Yeah, I would just say for us, like the virtual environment definitely has been challenging innovation in particular, but I think the way we've structured it is you could choose your time zone. So if you do have kids and you can only work in the evening, you'll identify that as your preferred time. But the level of commitment is still the same. It's just a matter of figuring out the time schedules. And there have been people that are really shy and they may not like turn their cameras on, but they'll still join the sessions. And so I feel like it's an opportunity for them to be a little bit involved, but they may not actually show up in person. So it reaches different people in different ways, I think.
Interesting.
So I know we have about 2 minutes left before the break, and I just wanted to challenge our audience to go out there and learn more about brainstorming approaches. That the final slide I have, and I'll share it again. I guess I'll try to share it now. Is that there are different approaches that you can take to idea gathering that will target the audience you're trying to engage with. So if you know the audience you're trying to engage with thinks better in silence, then there's an approach for that audience. If the audience you're trying to engage with is new to the company and doesn't really know the product well, there is an approach for that. And so clearly, there are approaches that work well for underrepresented audiences, but this is a large area of literature, and I invite everyone to kind of explore it and not keep using the same standard approach of inviting people into a room and asking them what they're working on, because it simply doesn't engage everyone in the room, and you miss a lot of intellectual property that way. So we have 1 minute left for Q&A if anyone wants to unmute and jump in with a question or to share it via the chat.
Hi, it's Joy. I have a question. I used to work in enterprise innovation for a large financial services company. And I felt like the patent group was so far away from the innovation teams, and the innovation teams were doing a lot of hackathons and idea generating, but the patent team wasn't a partner with us. So do you have any suggestions on how to more closely couple those two teams?
Yeah, so at eBay, what we try and do is really make ourselves more available and more approachable. I think it's a little tricky because unfortunately, nobody likes the lawyers no matter where you go, and patent lawyers somehow make it even worse. But every time I tell someone I'm a lawyer at eBay, they're like, oh man, I hope we never have to talk to you. And I think, no, I'm the kind of person I want you to talk to actually. But what we do is we really try to attend meetings, group meetings, we have information videos, all kinds of things that really just try to get the word out that the patent team is approachable. We're here to help you. We're here to serve you. We want to give you all of the tools that you need to get your ideas and your innovation heard and help the company. I mean, we're not here to really stifle you or make it complicated or make you feel like you're talking to an attorney. We want your open source out there. We want the patent ideas. I mean, even if they're ideas that we don't actually file, that doesn't mean that we don't want to help encourage you to think of ways to come up with things that can be filed and will be patentable. And so I think it really just comes down to communication and availability and really putting ourselves out there. We really do try to attend meetings and communicate frequently and say, we're here, don't forget, we'll check in with you every once in a while. And if you need something, here's how you can reach us.
Thanks, Michelle. Saadia, any thoughts?
I mean, I'm not familiar with the structure of that particular organization, but I would just say whoever the innovation group would be focusing on, I would just suggest highlighting the importance of the patent focus in the innovation that's coming out would be really good. And again, it's just aligning the objectives. And then the benefit would be to the company in capturing the patents. And then hopefully there'll be more communication like Michelle suggested.
Great, thank you.
Any other live questions or questions for our speakers? I think 10 seconds is probably good for that. So I wanted to, on behalf of Michelle and Saadia and myself, thank everyone for attending this. I'm gonna be jumping into one of the networking sessions after this, but thank you all for attending. And if you have any questions, feel free to email any of us after this, and I'll see what the format is for sharing slides with the attendees. Thank you all.